Hi, Contessas. Welcome to the Career Contessa podcast, your shortcut to being more fulfilled, healthy, and successful at work. I'm your host, Lauren McGoodwin. We're back today with another episode in our 3 in 30 series. So happy you guys are liking this, where we bring you 3 tangible tips in 30 minutes that you can implement in your career right now. My co host for this series is Marnie Lemonik. She is a Career Contessa coach and a regular on the podcast. Hi, Marnie.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be back for another 3 in 30. Today, we're diving into how you can harness the power of imposter syndrome. I know most of us are familiar with the feeling of imposter syndrome throughout our careers, but today we want to provide 3 tangible tips that actually help you use this more negative feeling to your advantage. Just to set the scene here, I want to share a detailed definition of imposter syndrome that I found on betterup.com. They define imposter syndrome as feelings of insufficiency, which pushes people to go out of their way to make poor or risky decisions. The imposter phenomenon causes people to experience a fear of success. They believe it is unattainable, no matter how hard or often they try to attain it. Success isn't meant for them. Oof, there's a lot to unpack there, especially if not handled correctly. It sounds like imposter syndrome can really threaten your ability to push through those uncomfortable feelings and attain that level of growth. Lauren, I'm curious if any of those risks ring extra true for you in your career.
Oh, absolutely. And I just have to laugh because my mom has a phrase for this where she's like, you have to hang in the pocket. So I guess if you guys have been listening for a while, you know, my mom like loves football and hang in the pocket's like something they tell quarterbacks to do. Like they got to sit in the pocket until they find the right person to throw the ball. And it's like, my mom will always be like, you have to sit in your pocket of discomfort a little bit longer in order to find like the right moment. And I like the visual illustration of that because it's like, yeah, it's probably incredibly uncomfortable to be sitting there as the quarterback and be like, these guys are going to come and kill me until I throw the ball. So I like what you described, and if anybody wants to put it another way, like think of the pocket. But I really resonate with this because I mean, I just recently did a job search as someone who hasn't job searched in 10 years, but I was giving job search advice, and I can only tell you the massive imposter syndrome of feeling like I know what I'm doing, but do I really know what I'm doing? Am I going to be successful? Like it feels so weird to be in that position and very uncomfortable when, again, maybe you haven't been in that role for a while. So I personally had a lot of imposter syndrome, just being honest on here, when I was job searching, even though there were people in my life that were like, oh, you got this. Like, there's no way you have this. And so I think even if it's like a moment where you're like, I shouldn't be this uncomfortable, or I know what I'm doing. It's new, it's different, it feels uncomfortable. Imposter syndrome just finds its way of just kind of like, it finds a crack and always goes through it, I swear.
That is such a good way to put it. It's so true. And I think something that we were talking about a little bit earlier today, too, is just the concept that everyone goes through it, which I think is a really helpful reminder because we tend to think that once you get to a certain level, I'm sure everyone
Totally.
thought you, Lauren, were going to be great because you're obviously a career queen, like you'll be fine in the job search, but you're not immune to it and no one is immune to it.
Yeah, there's actually a stat from University of Cincinnati that says that at least 80% of the general population experiences imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. So that just goes to tell you. And I actually wanted to go a step further, and I actually found that some incredibly successful and iconic figures have also experienced it. Some fun ones I found were Albert Einstein reportedly told a friend that it made him ill how much people admired his work. 3-time Oscar winner Meryl Streep wondered aloud if anyone still wanted to see her in the movies. Newsflash, we do. Even Michelle Obama has admitted that she still experiences imposter syndrome and that it never goes away. And I think the part of this that kind of like stuck with me is that it doesn't go away, right? It's not one of those things, to your point, Marnie, like, oh, you hit a certain level in your career and then you're done. And that's kind of a theme on the show, I think, a lot, where it's like, oh, you think when you hit a certain level or when you finish that project, like, and it's like, no, like this ongoing learning keeps going. And so does the imposter syndrome that can come in during these moments.
Definitely. And I think it is affirming to know that if you're feeling this way, nothing is wrong. And I think it actually means you're on the right path, which I'm going to speak to quickly because I think we are always quick to hate on imposter syndrome and not talk about the benefits of it. We found an article from Harvard Business Review that was titled Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome. And this is actually one of the top 100 most read articles in history. And in the article, there's a lot of good stuff. We'll link it in the show notes. The thing that really stuck out to me was that imposter syndrome disproportionately affects high achievers because they find it difficult to accept their accomplishments. So, my hot take after reading this article was that if you are feeling imposter syndrome, I think it's kind of a good thing. It probably means you're a high achiever, you're pushing yourself, you're getting closer to growth. I know in my own career, the times where I felt the most intimidated by the challenge at hand and nervous about how I was going to perform, those were the times where I not only rose to the occasion, but also grew the fastest. So, with that being said, it's not a fun feeling, but we do think that there are some benefits to it in ways that you can use it to really expedite the growth that you're experiencing. So, let's get into the tips.
Awesome. Okay, so tip number one is actually to seek out imposter syndrome rather than avoiding it. This may seem counterintuitive, but when you are feeling imposter syndrome, it normally means that you are in a stage of hyper growth, right? You're hanging out in that pocket. It's that hyper growth moment. Whether you just started a new job, or maybe you're moving into a people manager role, or you're taking on just a project with a new team, whatever it is, we tend to doubt ourselves when we're doing things that are outside our usual comfort zone or dealing with people outside of our usual, day-to-day interactions. If we can remember that imposter syndrome is a necessary step along the path of career development, then it can help us stop shying away from it and actually actively seek it out. It was interesting. You guys probably know this, but my daughter was at therapy the other day, and one of the things that was happening, she was kind of having a meltdown, and the therapist was like, using her therapy stuff on her. And I was like, oh, you handled that so well. Like, I want to learn how to do it. And she was like, I actually like when people kind of are out of their comfort zone. Like my daughter had napped, she had been out of her regular thing. She's like, because there's more moments for growth for us to actually work with her to like, in that specific example, change the behavior. And I was thinking about that, like for this example of imposter syndrome, like getting out of your usual patterns might make you uncomfortable, but those are the moments where it's like the really highly teachable moments for you as well. So a few ways that you can actively seek this out and put it into action. Number one is take some time to reflect on the last time that you were, quote, stretched in your current role. And if it's been longer than 6 months, or you're like, I actually don't remember, you don't even have to remember the month, but just the fact that you don't remember would be enough. Bring an idea to your manager for something that you would like to take on that would be a new experience for you, a net new experience for you, or a new project, or working with a new person, whatever would be new for you. And if it makes you a little uncomfortable, then that's exactly like keep following those breadcrumbs. And then the second thing I would say, if you realize upon reflection that you're in a current season of dealing with imposter syndrome, the biggest thing you can do for yourself is to document the experience and make sure that you are writing down those small wins or aha moments about your confidence and overall experience that you're going through. So I think sometimes like naming the emotion or naming what's causing the imposter syndrome is important, but also recognizing what is the achievement, what is the win, what's my learning moment along the way. These are all really important things to actually sit and take in and make sure you're, writing down helps me make sure I'm like actually taking it in. So that's tip number one is lean into that imposter syndrome. This is the breadcrumb you want to follow.
Definitely easier said than done, but I think that's such a good point. And writing it down can take some of the emotion out of it too. Sometimes we're so afraid of something that we make it a lot more intense in our head. And then the minute you have to articulate it into words and see it on paper, you realize it might not be as deep as you thought it was originally. So I think that's a nice byproduct of that too.
Totally. And it's like get away from a screen, don't be interrupted. But to your point, maybe it's less scary when you write it down versus all the fears in your head, right? That's a really good point.
Totally. Tip number two is to replace the goal of perfection with the goal of pride. If you're a high achiever, which I'm pretty confident you are, if you're listening to this podcast, I'm going to venture to guess that you do hold yourself to a high bar when it comes to that perfection. And again, I say this from personal experience. This feels like a joint career therapy session for you and
I
I today.
know.
Because I used to define my career success by my ability to complete a task what I would deem perfectly, which just meant not needing to ask anyone for questions. And I thought that was the feeling that I was chasing. But as I developed further into my career, especially once I became a people manager, I started to realize that the real metric of growth I should be anchoring on is how proud I'm making myself on a regular basis, because that's the feeling that shows me I'm continuing to chase those opportunities outside of my comfort zone. If you anchor too closely on the perfection piece, what actually happens is that you can stunt your growth because you're just staying in your cocoon and you never want to bust out of it. So leaning on pride is almost the vehicle to follow those breadcrumbs to Lauren's first point. And there's so many different ways that you can do this. So I want to talk about it in two different buckets for the tangible tips on this one. First is internal and more your mental sanity or peace of mind. And the second is going to be external or how you're communicating what you're doing to managers, job interviewers, etc. So for the internal piece, if you are really trying to be in your pride era rather than your perfection era, you want to set aside time to reflect on a regular basis, again with the writing, but you want to specifically reflect on times where you overcame something that felt insurmountable in the moment. So maybe you had a tough week and you had a client issue that was really intense and it wasn't anything that you had dealt with before. You want to write down the feeling that you had when you had to deal with it originally and how you're feeling now. Maybe it went well, maybe it didn't go great, but you still made it through. That's the proof that you want to collect over time, just to prove to yourself that you are making yourself proud. Now, the flip side of this is you're going to have to articulate your value and what you're accomplishing to people besides yourself in the workplace as well. So, if you're talking to your manager, one way you can do this is when you come to your one-on-ones, bring complex problems that have either already been resolved and share them more as an FYI on what transpired. Or if you're in the middle of resolving those complex problems, bring solutions, but make sure that you also have a POV on which path you think you should take moving forward. When you think of being a solutions-oriented person, that's the nugget that people tend to forget. So make sure you have a point of view on where you'd like to go. And if you're in a job interview and you're trying to explain all of these really pivotal moments where you've grown a lot, you'll probably be asked anyways, tell me about a time where you pushed through conflict. Tell me about a time where something went wrong. This is the number one question I prep with people. And the reason for it is that as an interviewer, they want to know how are you going to react when you are dealing with something new and how are you going to perform under pressure? So it's really the same principles that you would communicate to your manager in terms of those strategic thinking skills and why you did something the way that you did. And there's a lot more examples, I'll say. So if you're in a weird situation and you feel like we're not covering it in this episode, feel free to DM me on Instagram and I'm happy to help you out there.
It's interesting, Marnie, because it's like I didn't even connect the dots about imposter syndrome does make its way into the interview process. And I don't mean in the sense of like you're nervous that you're going to fail the interview. I mean in the sense of like the interviewer wants to know, tell me about a time that you have had this feeling, or if you are a perfectionist, how you overcome that. And no, we're not talking about that, the answer to your biggest weakness. So a lot of this again kind of comes down to sort of these tools of like, how resilient are you? How often are you willing to get out of your comfort zone? What happens to you when you get out of your comfort zone? And it's like incredible to be able to have the self-awareness to be able to answer that and be able to give those stories. And so I feel like you're also giving them just like a really good career tip of like, if you keep track of these things, anytime you are in a performance review or an interview or any big moment and they ask this kind of stuff, you will already have prepared for that. So it's like, this is like, in my opinion, just like kind of a little bonus there.
I think that's a good point. If you don't write it down, you will probably block it out of your mind because it was a
Absolutely.
stressful situation. That happens a lot with people in interview prep. So yeah, documentation is a common theme here.
Okay, and then tip number three, which I'm going to have you explain a little bit more, is lean
Mhm.
on the proof of your life to push through tough times. What is proof of your life?
I've heard this phrase, proof of your life, in a few different settings. And so I thought it was appropriate to bring into this conversation because we are talking so much about documentation of your wins. But the concept of it is be really honest with yourself about what's happened in your past and if what you're concerned about is actually that likely in the future. So if you're in a new situation and you've never experienced it before, that's obviously something that you can't directly compare to something you've gone through. But if you know, okay, I've pushed through tougher moments in the past, whether it's a season at work, whether it's a personal situation that you persevered through, you are showing yourself that you do know how to face challenges and you know how to get to the other side. So normally the doubts that we have are not backed up by the proof of how we've actually lived our lives.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's again, it's sort of like the narrative in your head versus the reality of what actually happened, which is to your point why you're like, put it down on paper because what you write on paper does not lie. Even if you're not trying to lie to yourself, sometimes you just remember things not the same way as how it actually happened, right?
Mhm. Definitely.
Okay, so the way to implement this proof of life concept is know that your ability to overcome challenges is a transferable skill within your life, which means that just because you're facing a certain type of work challenge for the first time doesn't mean your past accomplishments are irrelevant. If you've ever changed a habit or accomplished a goal, those abilities are already within you and are only strengthened with the more obstacles that you face. So again, I think one of the common themes I'm seeing throughout these tips that we're giving is essentially like don't shy away from the obstacles. Don't shy away from being out of your comfort zone. Don't shy away from saying, I don't know how to do this thing. If anything, these are those moments where you come out on the other end and it's like euphoric, right? You're like, I did this thing that I didn't know I could do. I remember when I was writing my book, which I've probably been very open about the fact that that was like the hardest project I've ever worked on in my entire life. 60,000 words is just incredibly hard. But like being done with it and being like, I did it. Like I followed through with this thing that I wanted to quit so many times and I didn't know how to do it. And I felt like, where are the experts who are going to coach me in how to do it? And I can only say that like leaning into that discomfort and just being like, I'm going to figure it out has like served me well. And so many other times where I've like gone back to that and then like, I didn't know how to write a book. Like, okay, I can do this thing. This has got to be easier than that. So that's like my big example that I walk around with. Marnie, I'm curious if you have either a big example that you walk around with, or maybe if there are people that you admire in your career who are really good with this skill set that you can talk more about.
It's a similar theme that you just spoke to, which I think is going through something that is really tough in the moment and then using it as your superpower or hype up to yourself moving forward. I have a few scenarios in my own career where I felt like I was stretched a little thin, but one that kept coming to mind that I wanted to share just because I think it's important to talk about is at my last job where I was managing people, I had a few teammates that joined the company in a time that was just extremely stressful in terms of the goals that were on our plate, the pace that we were moving at, the amount of change that we were going through. And the people that joined the team at that moment in time, which isn't even necessarily, any skill that they're bringing in, it's just the happenstance of circumstance, ended up being really, really strong at persevering in times to come because they had this bar for stress that was set so high, for better or worse. And so they learned early on what they're able to do and how high they can rise to the occasion. And I'm not an advocate for having a really stressful job or stressful job season just for the fun of it. But I do think it's important to remember that if you are going through a tough time now, it's not going to be for nothing. And it is probably something that you're going to anchor on. The other reason I wanted to talk about this scenario in particular is the people that I was managing, they were all significantly younger than me. And I was also quite young at the time. So I think we tend to think that we don't get better at mastering these skills until we're a certain level or until we're a certain age. But just like the feeling never goes away, I feel like there's no level that you have to attain in order to start to harness it. You can do it as early on in your career as you want, which is really empowering.
Yeah, I will say I think one of the most important truths that I can share is that confidence is going to be essential in fighting imposter syndrome. So I almost think sometimes when you're younger in your career, you have this blind confidence that maybe if you've gotten older, maybe someone told you weren't good at this thing. And anyway, the point being is that don't listen to that because everybody can build their confidence. And I think one of the ways to do that is like prioritize those habits that do help you build confidence. Habits like, again, writing down your accomplishments. I know we're a broken story with that, but like, please, like that really does help. There's actual science that backs that up too. Surround yourself with folks who will champion you. And think of these practices almost like you're building a wall of confidence, brick by brick that keeps nasty imposter thoughts out. Of course, the bricks might get knocked out of place from time to time, and that's okay. But the goal here is to remember to find a way to always keep building. And I know that each time I rebuild, my wall of confidence, I'm doing it with more knowledge and sturdier materials. And that's what I want for you. I want imposter syndrome to, even though it might find ways to kind of seep through the cracks, and that's okay. Make peace with, the inevitable ebbs and flows in confidence and imposter syndrome, but recognize that when you have to do extra work to squeeze out that imposter syndrome, when do you need to, okay, write a few more things down? When do I need to pause and like look back at my accomplishments a little bit more? Because the goal is to build this fortress of self confidence that makes imposter syndrome, just hit the road, or at least, come, but have you have these moments of extreme clarity, being like, I recognize what this is. I recognize that I've got the tools in my career toolkit to kind of work through this moment, whatever it is. It's interesting. One of the stories I was sharing with you, Marnie, before we were recording is like, I'm at last it's like, ask me if I like, or basically what I do, like a social media reel. And I'm like, I don't even do this for career Contessa. I don't like doing these things. I'm deeply uncomfortable. I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. I'm always like, I'm too old for TikTok and Instagram. And like, I made one, and it probably, it's not like the most amazing thing in the entire world, but I do recognize that getting started and starting where you're at with things is also kind of a tool in helping you build confidence, right? And so like, not saying no right away. If that's your knee jerk reaction, maybe say, my knee jerk reaction is to say no to this assignment that you've asked me if I would do. Let me take a moment to come back and be like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm willing to take a shot at it. And build from there. And so, I think we're kind of rounding out this episode of these two really important topics of like confidence to kind of beat imposter syndrome, but also confidence in yourself, confidence in leaning into those tough moments because they're not going to go away, unfortunately.
I love the phrase the fortress of self-confidence. I want to put that on a sticky note on my computer. I think that is the perfect note to end on, and we all need to go support the Atlassian Instagram page now.
No, please don't. I was like, do not go look at it. I've only done one. And also the irony of the one that I did is they did an ad with Zach Woods. So I'm literally next to the Zach Woods ad. So, again, there's me, and then there's like an actual professional comedian and actor next to me. So be kind if you do go look at it that I did it, but I'm stretching, I'm getting out of my comfort zone. I'm stretching myself and saying yes to things that, at Career Contessa, I didn't say yes to. And maybe there was a part of me where I was like, I can stick my head in the sand a little bit and not have to say yes to that. So thank you, Marnie, for pointing that out.
No, of course. We got to support. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that this was helpful for you all too. If you have any feedback, obviously you can reach out to us. Our DMs are open on Instagram and LinkedIn for any feedback, any ideas on future episodes. We'll make sure those are linked in the show notes. And our next episode is actually going to be 2025 workplace predictions. So it'll be our last 3 and 30 of the year. And Lauren will have to revisit our 2024 predictions. I think we did a pretty good job with those. Most of them came true.
I think we did. I actually am excited to kind of look back on those, and maybe, yeah, that's how we should start the show. And also let us know, you guys, DM us if you're, or leave a review, open to however you want to communicate. How are you liking this series? Do you want to hear more of them? Marnie also has ideas for some more in 2025, but we only want to do it if it's helpful for you guys. So let us know, please. We want your feedback. I also want to mention that we at Career Contessa have an online course that can help you further combat imposter syndrome. It's called the Confidence Crunch. It's like one of our all-time most popular online courses. So I will make sure to link that in the show notes as well. It makes a really good holiday gift too. Not that you're sending the message to somebody, but I think it's really applicable to anyone at any stage of their career. And do not forget that Marnie is available for one-on-one career coaching, but be sure not to sleep on booking with her, because you guys, she gets booked very quickly. And you can also DM her on Instagram to share feedback or ask questions. But coaching one-on-one, there's nothing better than that. So if you're at a crossroads with your career, I want to mention that as well. And lastly, I just want to thank everyone for listening to this episode. Please take your time to rate, review, and subscribe. Give us your feedback. It's the number one way that you can support our show, and let us know what you want to have us cover in the future.